I'm Calvin Rhodes, 70, and I once believed that help came with clean hands. At 11:38 a.m. on a Saturday, my neighbor waved from the curb, congratulating me for a fundraiser that I never initiated. That night, my daughter-in-law Brooke showcased a shiny pickup on social media, declaring, "Finally, couldn't do it without this community," despite the fact that the fundraiser headline exploited my name and an old diagnosis I had bravely conquered 2 years ago. Before we continue, please subscribe. It helps this reach someone who needs it. I have always believed that help, when freely given, left no mark. A man could take an outstretched hand and keep his dignity if the hand was clean and the grip was equal. I was 70 years old, and if nothing else, I had refined the art of accepting little and owing nothing. On Saturday at 11:38 a.m., as I folded the morning's blue-gray utility bill into a discreet square, my neighbor across the street hailed me from the curb as though I had won the goddamn lottery. "Calvin," he called, hand raised in a scout's salute, his dog already pissing an arc on the nearest sapling. "Saw the update. You're a legend, man." I hesitated at the foot of my driveway. The morning was still cool, the sun whitening the brittle blades of grass and casting every crack in the pavement into sharp relief. I considered feigning deafness, an affliction both credible and convenient at my age. But instead, I gave a wave and tried to mask my confusion with an old contractor's smile. The sort that promises nothing but is never impolite. He beamed at me. "Can't believe you beat it. You deserve every penny." "Thanks," I said, and let the syllable hang between us like a snapped line. His dog yanked forward, my neighbor followed, and for a moment I envied the animal's single-minded clarity. I had no idea what he was talking about. By noon, I had checked both the neighborhood message board and my personal email, but there was nothing unusual except a chain letter from my insurance agent and 3 consecutive "Did you forget something in your cart?" missives from a hardware outlet I had never patronized. I could have left it at that. It is the privilege of men my age to pass over mysteries as if they are not worth the salt, but this one clung to me like the tail end of a bad dream. The compliment was not just out of place, it was a trespass. I had never won anything. I had not even entered. That night, after the leftovers were sorted and my second round of blood pressure pills had been choked down with off-brand seltzer, I was reading on my phone when a text from my son, Darren, blinked onto the lock screen. It was a link unadorned by message or context, followed by a row of those wide-eyed emoji faces that Tyler, my grandson, sometimes spattered across his own texts. Curious, I clicked. The page took several seconds to load, as if it was building suspense, and then greeted me with a photo I recognized immediately. My own face, wan and puffy 2 years ago under hospital fluorescence, oxygen cannula wedged beneath my nostrils. The headline was even worse. "Help Calvin Rhodes conquer cancer again." The air left my lungs, not all at once, but in staggered releases, like a balloon too brittle to pop. I scrolled the page. The fundraiser had been posted by Brooke R., which I had to read twice before accepting that Brooke, my daughter-in-law, had dropped her married suffix for her maiden name. The narrative was overwrought, a novella about an unsung hero of our community and a battle that never truly ends. There was a paragraph about my inspirational journey, my grit and humility, and a long bulleted list of side effects that, while technically accurate, were no longer applicable. They made it sound like I was already halfway into the ground. A donation meter glowed beneath the text, 2 thick green bars beyond its goal. I flicked through the recent donors and recognized half a dozen names from my life. The guy who ran the print shop, a retired janitor who once lived 2 streets over, my ex-wife's cousin. Some had left messages. "We're all pulling for you, Cal. Rooting for your recovery. Hope to see you back at the VFW soon." I set my phone on the table, then wiped my hands as if the words had stained them. The rest of the house was silent except for the steady click of the thermostat. Outside, a motion-activated lamp burst to life and threw the silhouette of a raccoon across the porch. I went to the window. I could see my neighbor's house, the porch light on, the living room flickering with cable news. I wondered if he was still awake, if he had donated, if he was proud of himself for being part of a communal miracle. I pressed my thumb and middle finger to my temples and massaged the familiar tightness. It wasn't pain exactly. It was the sense of being unmoored, of having one's own narrative hijacked by someone else's urgency. I returned to my phone and kept scrolling, past the donations, to the updates section. Brooke had written 3. A gushing thank you for the initial outpouring. A photo of a dinner I did not remember eating, captioned, "A hero's feast." And then, from that evening, a selfie of herself in front of a red pickup truck, keys raised, Tyler grinning in the background. The caption read, "Finally mobile. Couldn't have done it without this amazing community. Thank you for getting us back on the road." It took me a full minute to understand. The fundraiser was not for my treatment, which was already over and paid for by Medicare, but for my family's recovery journey. And that journey, apparently, required a shiny, late-model truck. I stared at the photo, at Brooke's teeth bared in a social media smile, at my own grandson, whose eyes betrayed not even a glimmer of complicity. The next morning, I checked the fundraiser again, as if hoping it had vanished overnight. Instead, the total had climbed another $2,000. There was a new message from someone I vaguely remembered from my high school years. "Cal, you always helped others. Let us help you." I closed my eyes and conjured the faces of people who had actually helped me. The orderly who had wiped my mouth after a failed pudding cup. The neighbor who once raked both our yards after my surgery. The home nurse who never judged when I forgot her name. I thought of the son and daughter-in-law who had not visited once during that second, milder round of chemo, but now had a truck and the applause of strangers. I considered, not for the first time, that dignity was a resource more fragile than blood. I wrote no reply to the fundraiser. I did not text Darren back or call Brooke to demand an explanation. I spent the day in the backyard, cleaning the filter on the pond and oiling the fence gate, ignoring the persistent buzzing ache in my chest. When the sun set, I was still out there, picking at the splinters in the cedar with my thumbnail, as if it was possible to sand the world back to its original shape. In the darkness, the house looked like it belonged to someone else, a man with fewer regrets, a man who had not mistaken silence for love. I thought about the money, the truck, the neighbors who would forever believe I was a living charity case. I thought about the word legend and how quickly it could mutate into burden and then ghost. When I came inside, I turned on every light, poured myself 3 fingers of whiskey, and sat at the kitchen table with the phone face down. I made a list in my head of people who would never have done this. The list was short, but it steadied me. I had survived worse than this, and I could survive a little more. Still, I could not help but feel that something had been taken. Not money or even pride, but the story of myself I had spent a lifetime telling. I went to bed, but I did not sleep. When I was young, I believed in a world arranged by merit and muscle. I laid concrete with my own hands, sometimes in the bitter pre-dawn, and returned home with so much grit between my knuckles that my wedding ring wore itself to a smooth band in less than a decade. The first time my son needed braces, I sold my old gunmetal tool chest, every ratchet and hex, every precision screwdriver that had survived 3 recessions and a house fire. I watched it leave in the back of a stranger's pickup, each drawer slamming shut with a finality I felt in my chest. I took on nights at the feed mill, and weekends hauling drywall for the man everyone hated but who paid cash, no questions asked. I would return home well past midnight, the sweet metal reek of fertilizer in my nostrils, my hands raw and singed, and sleep in short, dense increments. My ex-wife once joked that I worked so much I would die at my desk and not even notice. I remember laughing, genuinely, because the idea of a peaceful end in a climate-controlled office seemed to me a kind of benediction. When Darren was a teenager, he started failing algebra and sleeping through his alarm. The school called twice. I listened to the principal's voicemail message twice as many times before deleting it. Instead of scolding him, I made it my mission to do everything else. Laundry, groceries, driving him to every after-school event. I remember once carrying him to his bed after he fell asleep on the living room carpet, his legs now longer than mine, his head slumped on my shoulder. He muttered something into my neck. "You don't have to, Dad." I told him I wanted to. That was the lie I believed for 20 more years. I never remarried. I learned instead to move in and out of other people's lives, filling the gaps and never overstaying. I spent my Sundays fixing things for widows and the elderly, tightening the legs of a kitchen chair or recalking a tub and leaving before they could press coffee or a slice of pie into my hands. I accepted a casserole once, in a moment of weakness, and returned the dish scrubbed and shining, the neighbor's name taped to the bottom like a grave marker. She died 3 months later, and I went to her funeral, sitting at the back and counting the people who whispered my name as I left. When Brooke entered the family, I recognized something of myself in her. She hid her pain well, wrapping her wrist before anyone else could see the swelling, never asking for help even when her hand curled like a snapped claw. When Darren started getting overtime at the distribution center, it was Brooke who managed the home, scheduling Tyler's doctor's appointments, shoveling the walk, and keeping the freezer full with couponed meats and bulk vegetables. She texted me only in emergencies, usually around midnight, her messages brief and apologetic. Tyler's fever spiked. Should I take him in? Darren got a flat, no spare. Can you help? I always helped. It was a matter of principle. When you are the kind of man who never says no, you eventually attract people who will ask you for everything. At first, I felt a quiet pride in being indispensable. By the 3rd year, it had hardened into a kind of fatalism, a knowledge that my usefulness was the only thing keeping the phone ringing, the only thing keeping me from dissolving into the background like so many men of my generation. I bought groceries for them more times than I could count, paid off a lingering dentist bill for Tyler because the thought of my grandson suffering over a cavity felt obscene. I fixed their water heater with a borrowed part and never asked to be repaid. I drove Brooke to her hand specialist in St. Cloud on 2 separate occasions, missing work each time, never telling my supervisor the real reason. When I gave her a check to cover the copay, she returned it 3 weeks later, shredded into strips, inside a Christmas card signed, "From all of us." I kept the card. It sits in my file cabinet, along with a drawer full of similar keepsakes, photos, bills, receipts. I have always been a documentarian of my own insignificance. Every favor, every check, every envelope addressed in my shaky handwriting, I kept them as proof not of my goodness, but of my continuing relevance. Even now, when the favors have long since outnumbered the thanks, I cannot bring myself to throw them out. When my own diagnosis came, I told no one for 6 days. I endured the scans and the sharp-edged conversations with the doctor, the names of treatments that sounded like distant planets. I made arrangements for my house, my car, and even paid off the final balance on Darren's student loan without saying a word. I believed, sincerely, that I was sparing them. I thought, if I bore it alone, it would somehow weigh less for everyone else. By the time I told Darren, I had memorized the name of every chemotherapy drug and could recite my treatment schedule like a child's prayer. They visited at first in pairs. Darren and Brooke with flowers, then just Brooke with Tyler in tow. On my bad days, I claimed to be out or resting. The truth was, I couldn't stand being seen as weak or unfinished. I wanted to be the same dad, the same fixer, the same silent pillar. I never asked for help, not even when the nausea left me dry heaving into the bathtub, or when the nerve pain made it impossible to grip a fork. When it was over, I rang the little brass bell they had in the hospital corridor and drove myself home, refusing even the suggestion of a cab or a neighbor's escort. The nurses applauded, and for a moment, I felt genuinely proud. It was only in the aftermath, the unsteady recovery months, that I realized how little I had actually spared anyone. Darren went back to working weekends. Brooke's texts, once daily, dwindled to once a month, then not at all. Tyler started calling me Grandpa Cal in the third person, as if I was a character in a cartoon. My usefulness was depleted. I was no longer the indispensable man, just an old guy with a prescription history and a dented sedan. But I had survived, and in the logic of survivors, this was victory enough. I took up small projects, sanding down old furniture in the garage, organizing my filing cabinet by year, writing letters to friends who never wrote back. I tried to make myself smaller, easier to ignore. If anyone needed me, I would always answer, but I would not volunteer. I thought this was wisdom. I thought it was grace. I never anticipated that my absence would be filled by a jar with my name on it, rattling with the loose change of strangers and well-wishers. That my legacy would be measured not in the hours worked or the braces bought, but in the dollars raised for a story that was already over. I never imagined that all my quiet sacrifice would one day be recast as a tragedy worth selling. Lying in bed that second night, I stared at the cracks in my ceiling and tried to recall every time I had declined help, every occasion I'd smiled and waved off an offer, thinking I was doing someone else a favor by not needing them. I realized, with a sting that no medication could dull, that I had taught my family to see me as inexhaustible, as invulnerable, that I had given them permission to use my story however they pleased, because I had never once asked them to listen to it. The next morning, I got up at 5, dressed in the dark, and walked the 3 miles to the old print shop. The sidewalks were slick with last night's frost, the houses all shuttered against the cold. I watched the streetlights blink out one by one as the sun diluted the sky. I arrived just as the owner was unlocking the door, and he greeted me with the same half-smile he'd used for 20 years. I bought a ream of paper and a cartridge of black ink. He offered me a discount, and I accepted it for the first time in my life. When I got home, I printed out the entire fundraiser page, every update and comment, even the photo of the truck. I slid the stack into a manila folder and placed it in my file cabinet, right next to the shredded Christmas card and the final payment slip for Darren's braces. I added a note in my own handwriting, not for me. Then I closed the drawer, sat at the kitchen table, and waited for someone to call. I have always been suspicious of spectacle, especially when it comes in a font too large or a color too bright. The fundraiser page, when I viewed it a second time, looked more like an advertisement for a doomed reality show than a plea for help. My face, blotchy and unshaven, filled the screen above the fold. The caption underneath, "Calvin's last stand. Help us give him the peace he deserves." The word palliative struck me like a hammer. It was a word reserved for the dying, for the final, slow-motion phase that I had outpaced 2 years ago. I read the paragraph 3 times, and each repetition left a new bruise. Our beloved father and neighbor is battling for his last months, but with your support, we can make them comfortable and meaningful. There was nothing accidental about the lie. If Brooke had ever listened at a single oncology appointment, she would have known I was in full remission. Survivor was a word I allowed myself only in private, as if speaking it aloud might revoke the remission. But never had I consented to be embalmed in advance, staged for a charity death march. The donations refreshed every 60 seconds, names blinking into existence from towns I had not set foot in for decades. $50 from a man who used to park his fishing boat next to mine at the lake. $100 from the widow whose clogged sink I fixed after her husband's wake. There were messages from strangers. Keep fighting. Thinking of you every day. Each new contribution felt like a nail in my reputation, a debt I could never repay. I started to take notes, a habit I'd inherited from my own father, who believed that if you wrote something down, it could not be made untrue by rumor. I copied the donor list into a spreadsheet, the names and timestamps stacking up like a roll call of the misled. I saved every update Brooke posted, even the emojis, even the passive-aggressive "thanks to all who have stepped up," some more than others. I screenshotted the photo of the truck, then every comment beneath it, including one from my neighbor who wrote, "Great to see Calvin's family getting what they need." I then followed the breadcrumb trail to the withdrawals tab. The site, for all its gloss and curated empathy, was a sieve for private data. There it was, the account ending in -3114, scheduled for direct deposit. I did not recognize the number, but it wasn't hard to guess. I cached the screen, printed it, then clicked over to the platform's help section. I have never been a litigious man, but I have lived long enough to know that rules only protect the people who bother to learn them. The policy on misrepresentation was buried 4 layers deep and written in the kind of English that only lawyers or the recently betrayed could endure. I read every word. It was, in summary, any fundraiser found to be substantially misleading in nature would be subject to removal, and funds would be subject to hold or return, at the discretion of the site and, if necessary, law enforcement. I printed the entire policy, double-sided, and highlighted the relevant sections. I found the separate page on refunds and chargebacks, and printed that too. My printer whined and clicked, each page exhaling a faint smell of burnt dust and plastic. I stacked them in order, then went to my file cabinet and retrieved my own discharge letter, the one printed on thick, cheap hospital stationery, with my name and a single unambiguous line, "No evidence of residual disease." I sat at the table, the folder open before me. I ran my fingers over the raised notary seal, feeling the circle's roughness through the paper. For the first time since this all began, I felt the faintest twinge of control. The documentation did not erase the lie, but it insulated me against it. Each page was a brick in a wall of my own making. I returned to the fundraiser page one last time, half hoping it had been taken down, half expecting to find my photo replaced with a candle or a black ribbon. Instead, there was a new update. Brooke's writing had grown looser, more intimate, as if she was now writing to friends instead of strangers. Thanks to the overwhelming generosity of this beautiful community, we were able to surprise Dad with a weekend up north. It's so important to make memories while we can. Every dollar goes to giving him peace and dignity in this challenging time. Please continue to share. Every bit helps. The photo attached was a lakeshore, winter gray and still, the dock submerged in ice. I did not recognize it. It wasn't from any place I had ever visited, but the implication was clear. Brooke was now staging my life for public consumption, framing me as a figure to be mourned even as I sat alive and breathing in my own kitchen. My own son had not called. He had not checked if I wanted to be memorialized, if I approved of this new chapter. They were performing grief in advance, rehearsing my absence. I printed the update and added it to the stack. I wrote in pen the time and date beside the printout. For several minutes, I simply stared at the growing dossier, unsure whether I was compiling evidence or just assembling a final, unassailable account of myself. My phone buzzed. A new email, this time from the fundraiser site itself. I opened it, bracing for a canned, "We hope you're well" template. Instead, it was a fundraising milestone update, written in the same sugar-high language as all the others. "Congratulations, Calvin. Your community has come together to support you in your time of need. Click here to see how your story is inspiring others." I almost laughed. Not the laugh of surprise, but the laugh that comes when you are finally past humiliation, when you understand you have nothing left to lose. I forwarded the email to myself, then printed it and added it to the folder. The next step was obvious. I looked up the name of a local attorney I remembered from a neighbor's probate battle a few years back. I wrote the number in my notebook, along with a list of questions. How do I prove fraud? Can I stop the disbursement? Who owns my face? The questions were naive, but they gave me a focus sharper than the acid of betrayal. I resolved to call the attorney on Monday, when the office would be open, when the world would once again run on schedules and rules, and not on the whims of people who trafficked in sympathy. I placed the folder on the table, centered it, and tidied the edges. For a few minutes I just sat, listening to the slow tick of the kitchen clock, the distant hum of my neighbor's television. I thought about my own funeral someday, and whether anyone would bother to tell the truth, or if they would just copy from Brooke's script. I wondered whether anyone would remember the time I worked through pneumonia to finish a job, or the way I always let Tyler have the last piece of pie. I opened the discharge letter again and reread the words. No evidence of residual disease. I liked the finality of it, the absence of ambiguity. I resolved, in that moment, that if I was to be erased, it would be on my own terms. The clock struck midnight. I poured myself a glass of water, sat back down, and began to draft a letter. Not to my son, not to Brooke, but to the attorney, the platform, the world that so easily traded truth for the convenience of a good story. If they wanted a case for dignity, I would build it, page by page. Monday at 9:10 a.m. found me in an unfamiliar lobby chair, leafing through a glossy legal magazine and pretending to read. The office smelled like air freshener and vinyl, the overhead lights so unyielding they seemed to flatten even the potted plant in the corner. Attorney Dana Whitfield arrived with the swiftness of a bank teller and the focus of a woman who never once forgot to set her alarm. She greeted me by name, offered water or coffee. I declined, and shepherded me to a glass-walled conference room that overlooked the parking lot. She took her seat, phone face down on the legal pad, and folded her hands. "Let's walk through this together," she said, the way a good nurse might speak before drawing blood. "Start with what you want to achieve." "I want it stopped," I said. "The fundraiser, the withdrawals, the way they're using my name." Whitfield nodded, clicking her pen. "Did you approve any of this?" "No." "Did you approve the use of your image or the claim that you're in palliative care?" I exhaled sharply. "I'm not in palliative care. I'm not dying. I survived. My discharge letter's in the folder." She accepted my sheaf of documents, skimming each page with practiced speed. Her eyebrows lifted at the screenshot of the truck. "Who owns this account?" She pointed to the withdrawal number. "My daughter-in-law, Brooke. Maybe my son, Darren, as well. It's hard to say who's really behind it." She nodded again, made a checkmark. "And you'd prefer they not be contacted directly by you?" Whitfield offered the faintest of smiles. "That's why you're here." She pulled a laptop from her bag and began to compose a letter on the spot, speaking as she typed. "To whom it may concern, my client, Calvin Rhodes, is the subject of the fundraiser entitled Calvin's Last Stand. This campaign constitutes misrepresentation and unauthorized use of likeness under both state and federal statutes." Her words clattered out, each phrase careful and sharp-edged. I followed along, half in awe and half in disbelief that it could be so simple to put words to what I had felt for weeks. She shifted tone when drafting the platform letter. Request immediate freeze of all related disbursements pending resolution. Demand identification of account holder receiving said funds. Demand removal or correction of all misstatements regarding client's health status. She turned her screen to me. That look right? It was better than right. It was surgical. I nodded. Now for your daughter-in-law and son, Whitfield continued. It's a different approach. We send cease and desist letters, but also a notice to preserve their devices and social accounts. We don't want evidence lost. She looked up. Do you expect them to fight this? I hesitated. I think they'll deny it. Maybe say they meant well. Whitfield's mouth twitched. Most do. She clicked through a template, editing as she went, then flagged both letters for certified mail. Next, we make sure the State Attorney General's Consumer Protection Unit is looped in. If there's a criminal element, or if this platform has a history of these cases, they'll want it documented. I watched her assemble the digital packet, stacking my evidence with her own addenda. There was a comfort in the process, a rhythm to the careful assembly of accusation and counterpoint. She asked for my statement, and I gave it in slow, measured sentences, making sure to specify the dates, the lack of consent, the injury done to my reputation. Anything else? She asked. I hesitated, then said, It's not just the money. It's the story. The idea that I'm already gone. She looked me in the eye, and for the first time her voice softened. People tell the story they need to hear, not the one that's true. That's why you document. Move slow, speak plain. Let paper do the talking. By 10:05, the demand letters were sent, the AG notified, the digital record preserved in triplicate. Whitfield walked me to the door, her steps brisk but not unkind. It'll take a few days, she said. Expect blowback. Family never likes a surprise like this. But you did the right thing, Mr. Rhodes. I thanked her, unsure if I believed it yet. The walk back to my car felt lighter, as if a burden had been nudged slightly off-center. I sat behind the wheel for a minute, watching a pair of crows peck at the parking lot. I rehearsed what I might say to Darren or Brooke, if they ever called. I pictured their faces, Darren's tendency to blink when nervous, Brooke's way of curling her hair behind her ear when she was cornered. I wondered if they would ever see it my way, or if they would just add this to a ledger of grievances, another black mark against the man who never asked for help. At home, I found an email from the fundraiser platform's trust and safety team, confirming receipt of the complaint. I printed it, filed it in the growing folder, and underlined the words, "We take these allegations seriously and will respond within 72 hours. There was a formality to it that reassured me, even as I knew it was probably written by a temp or an algorithm. The rest of the day passed in small chores. I raked the backyard, refilled the bird feeder, and baked a loaf of soda bread just to have something to smell besides my own sweat. Each time the phone rang, I let it go to voicemail. I was not ready for confrontation, not yet. I wanted to let the system work, or at least fail, before I gave in to anger. That night, as I sat at the kitchen table with a slice of bread and a glass of milk, I took out the folder and flipped through each page. The stack had grown substantial, a visible record of my refusal to be rewritten. I read Whitfield's letter aloud, the legalese feeling strange and foreign on my tongue, but satisfying. I imagined the words ricocheting through servers and inboxes, creating ripples that might, eventually, reach the people who had assumed I would remain silent. Before bed, I drafted a brief note to Tyler, just in case. Don't believe everything you read about me. Love, Grandpa. I did not send it. I wanted to see, first, if it would ever be necessary. I slept better that night. Not dreamless, but steadier. And when I woke, I found that the world had not changed. But my place in it felt newly claimed, as if I had staked out a small perimeter no one else could trespass. I was not dying. Not yet. And now, at least, the paper would say so. The next morning, the response came swiftly and without apology. At 11:57 a.m., my inbox pinged with a notification from the platform's Trust and Safety team. Your report has been reviewed. The fundraiser has been frozen, associated accounts flagged, and all pending withdrawals placed on hold. We may require additional documentation to confirm your claim. Thank you for helping us keep our community safe. I stared at the email, uncertain if it represented progress or just another bureaucratic checkpoint. I forwarded it to Whitfield, whose reply was curt and efficient. Good. Now the bank. By 3:42 p.m., the bank's fraud department called my home line. The woman on the other end had a voice like a children's librarian, calm, deliberate, designed to soothe. She confirmed what I already knew. A transfer had been scheduled to an account ending in -3114, registered to a Brook R, and flagged for review by the platform's legal team. Do you want to set up additional protections? She asked, her voice pitched an octave above professional concern. I do, I said. Put a fraud alert on my credit file and add a verbal password to all my accounts. She asked if I had been the victim of identity theft before, and I said, not in so many words. She chuckled, not unkindly, and made the changes in under 5 minutes. After the call, I drove to the bank branch anyway, an old habit from a time when trust required a handshake and a second look in the eye. The teller recognized me from years of small deposits and utility payments. She smiled as if I was a regular, as if I hadn't just spent a week watching my own obituary parade across the internet. I handed her my driver's license and asked if there were any new accounts opened in my name. She checked, double-checked, then printed a slip for my records. There's a note here now, she said. No changes without your consent, and a verbal password. I told her the password, my father's first name, a detail so private it had never left the family tree. She wrote it down, careful and deliberate. For the first time in days, I felt something like relief. Not hope, but the relief that comes from locking a door before a storm. When I got home, I made a list of everything else that could be stolen, borrowed, or distorted. Social Security, Medicare, my own voice. I called each institution, set up secondary verifications, made sure my name would not be the currency for someone else's desperation. Each call was another notch on the handle of a tool I never wanted to use, but that I now could not do without. That night, I watched the local news just to make sure I hadn't become a segment. Elderly man duped by family, details at 10. There was nothing, not yet. The silence was almost worse than notoriety. I wondered if Darren or Brooke had noticed the freeze, if they were already drafting a new story to justify it. I wondered what Tyler had heard, if anything. I cleaned the kitchen twice, then sat in the dark, listening to the slow churn of the refrigerator. I thought about all the times I had trusted my family, all the times I had believed that love was a kind of insurance against betrayal. It was a fiction, I saw now. The world was just risk and mitigation, trust and verification, a constant negotiation between what you gave and what you protected. Before I went to bed, I set the folder of documents on the counter, right next to the coffee pot. I wanted to see it first thing in the morning, a reminder that the fight was still mine, that I had not yet surrendered to the story they wanted for me. The storm hadn't hit yet, but I was ready for it, or as ready as I could ever be. Subscribe and share one line you wish you'd heard earlier. Someone will borrow it. Wednesday morning. I woke at 5 and went about my business with the calm of a man who had rehearsed this day for years. The house was in order, floors swept, counter bare but for the folder, the discharge letter in a plastic sleeve atop the stack. I made coffee strong enough to curl the wallpaper, then set out 3 mugs, the good ones, so no one could say I had skimped on hospitality. Darren and Brooke arrived together, though they entered separately. Brooke marched in with a confidence she'd borrowed from television, hair perfect, lips pressed tight as a banker's handshake. Darren hesitated at the threshold, as if he expected a trap to spring the moment he crossed. I gestured them both to the kitchen table and waited until they sat before taking my own seat. "I appreciate you coming," I said, voice steady but low. Brooke spoke first. "Dad, if this is about the fundraiser," "It is," I said, "and more." I slid my phone to the center of the table, pressed record on the memo app, and said, "For accuracy." Darren's eyes flicked to Brooke, who rolled hers so slightly it could have been a tick. "I want you to look at these." I handed over the legal packet, Whitfield's letter on top, followed by the platform freeze notice, the refund policy, and the AG's case file number, each page annotated in my neat block print. "Read them. Out loud, if you want." Brooke took the stack, her hands shaking only at the edges. She read the first page, lips moving, then looked up. "Dad, we never meant for this to get messy. People wanted to help. They were asking how you were, what they could do. You told them I was dying," I said, and let the words hang. "You said palliative care." Brooke winced, but pressed on. "It's just language, Dad. People need a reason. Nobody donates to remission. They donate to tragedy." Darren cleared his throat, voice weak as a static line. "We didn't expect it to get so big. The money was supposed to help the family, and you. We thought maybe you'd want to travel, or—" "I wanted the truth," I said. "That's all." I drew out the discharge letter and placed it on the table. Next to it, I laid a printout of the truck photo, keys dangling, Tyler's smile frozen in pixels. "Here's the only medical paper I ever needed," I said, tapping the letter. "Everything else you printed goes back. I'm not your mascot." Brooke's face went red, but she kept her voice in check. "Dad, do you know how many people have messaged? How many prayers, casseroles, cards? This brought people together." I looked at her, searching for the girl who used to bake birthday cakes from a box, who once wrote me a thank you card so earnest I kept it for years. "They came together for a lie," I said, "and when this blows over, they'll remember the lie. Not me." Darren flinched as if struck. "What do you want us to do?" "Shut it down. Return what you can. Admit you made a mistake publicly. And don't ever use my name without permission again." Brooke reached for the legal packet, flipping through as if searching for a loophole. "Dad, there could be criminal charges." "Not if you do as asked. No one wants a circus." Darren stared at the table, jaw clenched, then nodded. "We'll fix it, Dad." I promise. I believed him, for the first time in years. Brooke stood, the packet held tight against her chest, and said, "If anyone asks, what do we say?" I poured another cup of coffee, hands as steady as my resolve. Say the truth. I survived. That's all. They left together, though neither spoke. I watched from the window as they stood in the driveway, hands in pockets, heads down. I wondered if Tyler would hear the story straight this time, or if the myth would grow its own legs, outpacing my small defense. I gathered the cups, washed them by hand, and set them to dry. I wiped down the table, careful to leave no trace of the meeting. Then I sat, the folder before me, and waited for the next move. I felt empty and full at the same time, as if I'd poured out everything I had and found, beneath the dregs, something like peace. Let them write the story they want. I had written mine, and for once it would stand. By Friday morning, the machinery of consequence had engaged. An email from the platform's resolution office arrived before sunrise. The fundraiser campaign, Calvin's Last Stand, has been removed for policy violation. Refunds to donors are being processed. All remaining funds are on hold pending direction from law enforcement. The language was careful but final. No fanfare, no public apology, just a cold, clean retraction. At noon, another message. The State Attorney General's office had assigned a case number and requested copies of all donor communications and bank records related to the negative 3,114 account. Whitfield's office took the call, as promised, and prepared a set of affidavits for me to sign the following week. There was a certain satisfaction in knowing that every page, every footnote, now existed in official archives, untouchable by rumor or revision. The next call came from a number I didn't recognize. The dealership, finally. A woman in finance said they'd received correspondence from a third party and that the truck purchase was now subject to a hold pending further investigation. I could hear her typing as she spoke, professional, but just curious enough to wonder if I was the hero or the villain in the story. I told her only that I wanted things settled properly, no shortcuts. She said she understood. That night, I cleaned out the fire safe in my bedroom closet, removing years' worth of stale passports, expired insurance cards, and even my old Social Security statement, yellowed and soft at the edges. I loaded the safe with the folder, every printout, every letter, the discharge note, and the final copy of Whitfield's demand, and closed it with a sense of deliberate ceremony. I wrote the AG case number on a strip of masking tape and affixed it to the inside of the door. Before bed, I penned a letter to Darren. It was not an indictment, nor a plea, but an outline. Dates, actions, the precise sequence of screenshots and statements. At the end, I wrote, "If you want to talk about money, get Dana on speaker and bring papers. Otherwise, let's not." I signed it simply, Dad. I put the letter in an envelope, addressed it in my best block lettering, and set it on the hallway table. No need for drama, just the facts, as always. Sunday at 2, Tyler arrived for coffee, a little taller and less boyish than I remembered. He handed me a bag of gas station cookies and dropped his backpack at the door. I brewed the good beans, poured 2 mugs, and let him talk about debate team and the new camera he'd saved up for. We sat in the sunroom, blinds half open, the light clear and clean as unvarnished truth. "Grandpa," he said, "I read some of the stuff online. Were you mad?" "Mad, yes," I said, "but mostly disappointed. Did you win?" I thought about it, about the word win, and what it might mean now. "I kept my name," I said. "That's enough." He nodded, dunked a cookie, and changed the subject. I let him. There was nothing left to explain. When he left, I watched him cross the yard, hoodie up against the wind, his steps brisk and purposeful. I wondered what story he'd tell about me someday. Maybe just that I was stubborn. Maybe that I never let anyone else do my talking. The house was quiet after he left. I washed the mugs, dried them, and put them away. Then I sat at the table, the afternoon light fading just a little, and allowed myself a small, private victory. Not the victory of punishment, or justice, or public vindication. Just the quiet certainty that I had, for once, chosen the terms of my own survival. It was enough. Some people believe justice is loud, a verdict, a sentence, a headline scrawled across the evening news. For me, it was a red banner across a website stamped, "Removed for policy violation." It was a string of numbers read aloud by a government worker, a file folder resting heavy in my fire safe, a banker's voice confirming, "What is your verbal password, sir?" Justice was a kitchen table with only my own pen marks, a discharge letter taped inside a cabinet, and no one left to tell my story except me. In the weeks after, I tried to live as before. I misplaced my glasses, burned my tongue on microwaved soup, oversalted the pasta until it bordered on chemical. I mowed the lawn in uneven stripes, waved at the neighbor, let the mail pile up in the vestibule until it threatened to topple. At the post office, I recognized some names on the return addresses. Small donations, small apologies, some perhaps meant for the man I used to be. I tossed them in the recycling without opening. The emails thinned, then stopped. The platform sent a final note, confirming the case was closed and all funds returned to the greatest extent possible. Whitfield sent a thank you card, unsigned, as if the matter had resolved itself. On Sundays, Tyler still came for coffee. Sometimes he asked questions, sometimes he didn't. I let him run the conversation. We made a game of who could spot the first robin or chipmunk on the fence, and once, when I caught him looking at my old tool chest, I let him open every drawer, even the broken ones. "Why do you keep all this stuff, Grandpa?" he asked. I considered it. "So nothing gets lost," I said. "So I remember how to put things back together." He nodded, as if that made perfect sense. Some nights I sat at the table long after dusk, the house settling around me, and I allowed myself to wonder what would have happened if I'd let the lie live. Maybe I'd have a few more casseroles, a shinier truck, a crowd of people convinced I was the world's bravest dying man. Maybe I would have drifted out on that story instead of this one, but I never wanted the myth. I wanted the record, the audit, the hard-won truth, even if it meant there was less to share, less to memorialize. When I finally felt ready, I put the folder away, closed the safe, and left the key in the lock. The world would write its own version of me, in time. But the one that mattered most was the one I could still read, in my own hand, with every name and number right where I left it. That was my survival. That was my victory. If any of this rings true, subscribe and leave one sentence, the boundary you'll set this week.